Okay, is this thing on? Yeah, it looks like it. Well, this is the first YouTube video that I've ever done, so it is most likely going to suck. It's going to be no intro because I don't have a graphic and I don't find, or I can't find my kazoo. But this is basically documentation of a hobby project that I'm going to use to keep my brain active during retirement. The idea is to generate a fully procedurally generated world stealing from things like Minecraft, Dwarf Fortress, and various other games. The next year is likely to be adventures in terrain and biome generation, followed by, the actual interesting stuff. Also, I suspect that this is where I'm supposed to say, what is it? Let's get into it. So, to make things challenging, I have decided to go with a hexagonal coordinate system for the world generation and the chunk structure for this world. I've stolen heavily from Red Blog Games for a lot of the hex coordinate system code. Essentially, we have a struct that has three floats and a constructor, and then a variety of other various operators and methods to get this to behave somewhat like the more familiar vector 3. Um, Next up is the cell class, which is essentially a pure C# class. The idea is that this is the chunk class. It's going to keep track of the meshes, the various objects associated with that particular chunk, and it's going to be managed and created by the cell manager. We're keeping it as a pure C# class so that it's not on any of the update loops and it can be entirely event managed or event driven. The cell manager is the bit that is intended to load cell data from disk, create the uh, existing cells and manage them, manage things like, handle things like view distance, that sort of stuff. And again, we're trying to stay off the update loop as much as possible and to lean on, the observer pattern where possible to, reduce the load. The idea being that this is going to be a fairly large open world that generates, and I would like the view distance to be fairly large. So I don't want to clutter up the update loop in Unity with too much trash. Just to get into this briefly, all we're doing here is we're just, getting a reference to the mesh generator. We are generating the cell objects, um, which basically just creating a new cell, adding it to a dictionary. Then we're walking through that dictionary and creating the game objects for the uh, hex terrains that will be associated, um, and then assigning that mesh to the cell itself. Later on, I'll probably include height maps in the data structure, so I don't have to I can pre-calculate that once. I don't have to keep calculating that for every single time. Uh, but then again, that's going to be based on how heavy the calculation is or how much data we're looking at with those meshes. And let's see here. I guess the next piece would be the hex mesh generator. This this piece handles the mesh generation. It's fairly straightforward uh, at the moment. So we've just defined where the corners of the basic hex is, or hex mesh, And then we just statically defined some triangles. No, well, not statically, but we've just manually set the triangles rather than be fancy and create them. This is a very this is the lowest um, level of detail. 7 vertices, 6 triangles, as minimum a mesh as possible. But as we go forward, what we're doing is we are going to be caching, subdividing and caching this mesh at various levels of detail so that we can just provide a reference to that mesh and not have to calculate this basic mesh um, each time. That way we can simply, take the height map and apply it to the existing mesh without having to go through the process of, you know, recalculating all of these vertex positions every single time. We've got the basic framework laid out for a level of detail, but there's nothing at the moment that actually sets level of detail. So at the moment, I think we're just generating at the lowest level of detail. So this will be a fairly simple mesh that we're laying out, or set of meshes really. Um, let's see, vertices add, what are we doing here? Set vertices. Oh yeah, we're just generating mesh. That's nothing important. The real magic is happening down here in the mesh subdivision. Essentially, I just feed this an existing mesh. It goes through all the triangles in that mesh and does midpoint subdivision on those triangles to generate a new mesh. This gives us, so for every triangle in a mesh, we will have, when it comes out of this subdivision process, we're going to have 4 triangles. And so eventually, as level of detail goes up, we get exponentially more meshes. I'm sorry, triangles in the mesh. You know, what was it? Like 6 times 4, and then the exponent on that is the level of detail. So level of detail 0, we only have 6 triangles. Level of detail 1, we're going to have 24, and then up from there. And that is that. The hex terrain itself is basically just a monobehavior shell for the um, to hold the meshes. We're going to be staying off of the update loop, and so that's the train. So there's really not a lot in here. It's just got a mesh filter, mesh renderer, um, a method to add the mesh. I will probably, no, let's not, don't want to get into the future, but this is just essentially a shell to hold the mesh and make it visible. And finally, see, we have hex terrain. Well, actually, that's what this is. So the world script. So going back, if you look at this, world object, it's got the cell manager, and that's setting a world radius of 32. The 32 cells. The cells themselves are essentially 64 meters in radius. Um, so this gives us essentially a visible different distance of 3 kilometers. But right now, it is 3 kilometers of a very flat plane. Um, I've got a little capsule here for a player scale reference, but you know, we've got to zoom in quite a bit before he becomes visible. And if we look at the actual meshes themselves, since we've got a fairly low level of detail, uh, you know, each of these meshes isn't contributing a lot to the they're fairly simple. As we go up with level of detail, I'm going to need to add things like frustum culling and that sort of thing to keep the meshes and active game objects under control. Similarly, once I add things like mobs and structures and that sort of stuff, I'll need to set a simulation distance to keep things from getting out of hand with respect to the various updates on the cells. Next time around, I'll probably be adding some basic height maps to the meshes and give the terrain a little flavor. I think at this point I'm contractually obligated to ask you to like and subscribe, but honestly, there's nothing going on here that you won't see done better elsewhere. I have no Patreon or monetization, but I may throw the project up on GitHub at some point for public critique and ridicule. Um, I guess snappy exit catchphrase at this point. All right, thanks for your time.